Welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where each episode you get to listen to two of Australia's leading professionals in the area of driving and community mobility for people with disabilities. In each episode, they interview drivers, carers, and industry experts and share the insider's guide to driving with a disability. Here are your hosts, Brad and Ollie.
Welcome to the Drivable Podcast. I'm Ali Akbarian, and over here with me is Brad Williams. Today we are talking about what it is involved to be a driver, a trained OT and specialized motor driving instructor with Brad. It's a special one today, and as we know, he's the CEO of Williams OT, but also on the National Driving Task Force and driver interest groups in South Australia. You guys all ready for this? Brad, you ready?
Yeah, you're gonna pound me with questions. I can feel it, but I'm ready. Let's do it.
Excited. Let's get into it. Hi everyone. I'm really excited to get into today's interview, but before we get started, we just wanted a quick shout out to our sponsors who make this show possible: Mobility Engineering and Williams OT. This show takes time and money to put together, and we are forever grateful to their passion for our industry. Okay, enough of the business. Let's get into the interview. Today, we have a special interview. Last week, Brad interviewed me in my positions within the industry as an engineer and a modifier. And today, we're reversing the hats, and today I get to interview Brad. So, Brad, g'day. How you going?
Oh, I'm all right. I'm nervous. What do you got for me?
That's good. All right, let's get into it. First thing is, let's start by a brief. We all know you're an OT, and we've spoken in the first episode about detailed history, but a quick little refresher and history about, I guess, what you do. You are an OT, but you said also driving instructor. So explain a little bit, I guess, about that.
Yeah, okay, no worries. So I used to work for a state-run hospital here in South Australia, the Repatriation General Hospital, as my first position out of university as an occupational therapist. But straight away, I fell in love with the driving clinic that was running there. And I just knew that that's where I had to be. And I hounded the managing OTs there until they could train me to become a driver trained OT. And then I was hooked. I loved it from then on. And it's what I do. It is what when somebody says, what do you do? It's all about OT. I think the kids come after that. Don't tell the kids that, but it's my passion. It's my area of interest. It's everything I live and breathe, and the kids and my wife. I will put them in there. But outside of that, that's what I do. Awesome. Started my own business in 2011 and became a driving instructor in 2013. Became trained in heavy vehicles around that time as well, and yeah, took off from there and now run a fairly established business here in South Australia, doing modifications as well as driving instructor and the OT side of it all.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And for those people out there, check out Brad's social channels as well. He's really great on the info, provides heaps of info and videos on that stuff. So lots of content. So it's really, really good to check it out. Okay, so something that you actually mentioned was a really good segue into what I wanted to bring up. So you're saying that you're working SA Hospital sort of as a hospital OT. Mm-hmm. And from my observation, as you know, I've been in the industry for over a decade as well. And basically, until the NDIS came around, I had never even heard of OTs, to be honest. And I was working in this industry. And that's the funny thing. I was modifying cars and engineering. I never even heard of an OT. And all of a sudden, the OT is the most important and biggest celebrity that you've ever heard of post NDIS. So I guess it's interesting because seems to have kind of sparked a few little things. First of all, one little question: is it harder these days being an OT?
Oh, no, not harder. Look, I've been a big part of the evolution, not me starting the evolution or the revolution or anything else like that, but I've lived through it from when it was a hospital scenario. And there was also in South Australia, especially. And everything that I say today comes from a South Australian perspective. It might be a little bit different in New South Wales or Victoria and so forth. But when I talk, I'm talking from my experience in the South Australian industry. Okay. So for other OTs listening, that mightn't be the same as what you've been through in your states. But before the NDIS, it really was hospitals doing more of the dementia assessments and trying to help people with strokes, as an example, to get back on the road. And then there was some private OTs, not very many, doing a little bit on the side to assist work cover. And the work cover clients, the ones that have been injured in a workplace accident, and trying to help them get back on the road. So we were established, absolutely. Driver trained OTs where it was a course that was running. I mean, I did it. It was definitely out there, but it was, well, it's tricky. I happened to do my assessment just as NDIS, my assessment training just before NDIS. So I can't give you a big history of what it was like beforehand, but that's my experience working in the hospital. It was less. And there's certainly a lot more driver trained OTs out there now, thanks to the NDIS.
Yeah, and I think everyone in the general community knows what an OT is nowadays, rather than like people. As I said, I didn't even know what one was. So and I was in the industry.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah, the NDIS put a lot of, well, not pressure, but they mention OTs a lot through the policies and procedures in regards to getting approval for bits and pieces. So whether it's car mods or home mods or whatever it might be, they reference an occupational therapist to be able to do that assessment. So that has certainly identified OTs as important people in the, I mean, we were always there, but it's certainly now identified in the policies and procedures as, yep, this is where we belong, and this is where you need to go to get to the next step.
In being a modifier, as I said before, like as we interviewed last week, it's interesting because it seems to be that when we have a person that's funding themselves for their own product, they seem to feel like using an OT is optional. But when there is NDIS, it seems to be that you have to use an OT in order to obtain funding. So I guess on that vein, you can touch a little bit about that, and how and which part do you fit into the NDIS?
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, we literally had this case yesterday. An older client who's had his license for 18 odd years, the old twist grip motorbike style hand controls, bought himself a new car, rocked up to the modifying side of bits and pieces and said, I want to replace these, and no, I don't want to deal with NDIS. I'm just going to pay for it, and wanted to upgrade to a completely different set of hand controls. So trying to give advice without giving advice based on experience rather than being an OT gets a little bit tricky through that period. So it's absolutely right. When you're privately paying, you can, as long as your license represents what you need, then you can upgrade to newer technology if you're private paying. But the NDIS is a little bit different. They want to have it assessed to make sure it's good value for money. And that's what it's mainly all about in the NDIS policies, that it's been assessed to meet your functional needs. So yes, this isn't going to cause you further injuries, or it's the right product for you, and it's the right product because whatever those reasons are. And that's where the NDIS have made it important for you to see an OT. They want to see that it's value for money, and that it's not going to sit there, one, being wasted, or two, spend thousands and thousands of dollars, and then next year they need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars more because it was a wrong product.
Yeah. That's...
If you buy your own stuff, well, then you're taking on that risk.
Yeah. Okay. So if you are, well, the first thing I might ask before we get to finding an OT is, you said that you were working in a hospital, let's say hospital, which I'm guessing is government, but what I've seen in my experience is a huge rise in private OTs, people like yourself working for themselves or working within a business. And I guess what that, well, first of all, I wanted to understand the first part of the question is there still government OTs around, and are they working with NDIS? Like, are you competing against government OTs? And if that's the case, and are there any like other categories like institutions of OTs or anything we need to be aware of? And if that's the case, how do we choose where we should go?
Well, there's a lot of questions in one question. Let me try and break that down. Yes, there is definitely hospital-run and other government-run OT driving clinics. 100% there is. And I believe, and this is just my opinion, that they've been dragged along for the ride. And there's certainly, I mean, the Flinders Driving Clinic, which is an evolution of the Repat Driving Clinic where I was, it was just me. Yeah. And I went from doing one assessment a day to 2 assessments a day to try and squish people in. And now it runs most days of the week, and there's 3 or 4 OTs in that clinic. So it has certainly grown over the same time, the NDIS part has grown, but I think that's more education and awareness in the whole industry about OTs helping people with disabilities to try and be on the road. So that's definitely evolved. The difference between a hospital and NDIS is, from my perspective, or in South Australia anyway, it gets a little bit tricky doing the NDIS stuff in a hospital. And we see a lot of people have their original assessments in hospitals, and then they end up coming to us to finish off the NDIS side of it all. Which means that we kind of have to start again, review all the previous assessments, which people don't always like, because we need to make sure that OT's done the right thing, and make sure that we're on top of it all and we're making the decision, because in the end, the buck stops with us if we're prescribing something. But they kind of have to go through the process twice. So the issue is how the funding models are set up within the hospital, about how much time you can invest into report writing and how much time you can invest in getting out and going to assess the modified vehicles, and basically how much time you can invest in getting down to the nitty-gritties. So a lot of the assessments in the hospitals are still doing a lot of dementia style assessments, the aged assessments for the over 65s, where NDIS don't meet that. And but they still do some elements of NDIS, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's more to the return to work without modifications assessments.
It's interesting. Generally, when I've looked at, even when I look at when I do the engineering, some states are government run and some states are privately run. What I find is this difference, and I wonder if it's similar in the OT space, which then can cause what you're talking about. Government person, their client is the general public, not just one person, but the private OT or private company, they are just looking at one individual as a client and then looking at the whole thing. I've found that, generally speaking, in a lot of industries, and I wonder if you might find it's a similar kind of culture there.
Yeah. Look, I'll be completely honest. The bulk of our clients now are NDIS. Okay, so we get a few private clients, clients that know that they need modifications come through us, and also a bit more flexibility to be able to meet the client's needs, whether it's going to their house or doing driving lessons in their area or whatever it might be. We've got a little bit more flexibility being a private company compared to a government, where you have to go to them and do an assessment around a set route and those type of things. We've got the flexibility to have the modifications as well available, and cars and all that kind of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, there's hospitals that have modified cars. I'm just talking from the experience here in South Australia. And even in South Australia, there's a hospital with a modified car. The Hampstead Rehab Centre has a modified car. They mainly assist clients with spinal injuries. So as they're coming out of hospitals to get them back on the road as they're exiting hospital. So they're set up to meet different needs, but it's kind of restricted to a specific need.
Yeah. Which is actually a good segue to my next set of questions, which is effectively, I didn't realize that there is occupational therapists or OTs, as we spoke about, but there seems to be an infinite number of subspecializations in OTs. And how does that work? And not just like, I want to talk about the specializing around drivers first, but what I wanted to know, first of all, these subspecializations of OTs, to me, as someone who's not from the industry, sometimes it feels like an OT's kind of just made it up and gone, oh, well, I'm a dining chair OT from now on, you know, and like, is that actually the case, or is there actually like a list of subspecialties somewhere and people are actually specializing, kind of like, you know, like plastic surgeons or whatever, you know?
Yeah. So driving is seen as an advanced scope of practice. Okay, so that's actually been assessed as an advanced scope of practice, a bit like a podiatrist who assesses feet, but then there's some podiatrists that can do elements of surgery. Driving trained OTs have to do a university postgrad course to be able to get a qualification in that. And so you need to be, when you're looking at OTs to be able to look at driving, you need to make sure that they've got a qualification to be a driver trained OT. So that's a postgrad course. And it's recognized as an advanced scope of practice. Don't get paid anymore from the NDIS or anything else like that, but you need to have this qualification to do this work. That's another political story there. We won't have time in this podcast to discuss that. But yeah, look, you need to have that extra qualification to be an advanced driver trained OT. There's other areas as well that are seen to be advanced scope of practice. So you can, and then there's other areas that are more recognized as OT roles. So OT is certainly grown in mental health, and that's a specific role. We do a little bit of driving instruction and so forth for people with mental health conditions, but mental health is certainly a specialized area. And then pediatrics, working with kids, is completely different to what I do. Completely different. So you're from university, you kind of segue into different avenues, whether it's adult mental health or pediatrics. But when you start doing adults, you can go off and do stroke rehab and then specialize down in towards home modification. So you're right. You just kind of start really broad. And as your career develops, a lot of OTs narrow their focus in on a specific area. OT itself is extremely broad because what we are overall are enhancers on life. So if you've got an issue, we try to overcome that issue to enhance your life. And that's the general concept of what an OT is. And as you can see, that's, fits nicely into driving. Yeah, got an issue. We want to enhance your life focused in on getting you back on the road. Yeah.
That's actually interesting. It's very similar to the engineering field, especially the automotive. You start, like, for example, I came out of uni, I was very excited. I could sign off on anything, trucks, buses, cars, disability, you name it, and then I realized that the quality of my work was not that great unless I actually started to get good at one area and just focus on that. And my guess is OT is probably very similar, because we have spoken in other episodes about how, you really want to find that good OT that kind of knows the product and knows the area.
There are some generalist OTs out there. Absolutely, that do a whole broad range of stuff. However, look, I might get shot down from the OT industry about this comment, but I'm brave. For the clients out there, find somebody that has a specific area if you want the best outcome for that area, because there's no way I can stay across all of the areas of OT. I just can't. And being generalist across all areas, I just can't. Wheelchair prescriptions, seating specialists, all of that kind of area. I just do not have the knowledge. I just don't have the brain space. It's only a limited area that I've got up here. It's, affected by the sun without hair and all kinds of stuff like that up there. But yeah, there's only a certain amount of room inside my head. And if I put in one bit of information, something else has to fall out the other side. I fill my head full of driving in information, whether it's modifications or techniques or strategies or all the information around driving. So that means that I can't stay on top of pediatrics. I can't stay on top of seating specialists for wheelchairs and so forth. So I don't prescribe wheelchairs. No way would I prescribe a wheelchair. I send them off to a wheelchair specialist, work with the wheelchair specialist to say, hey, for getting out and about in this car, it needs to have these features. The rest of it's up to you to prescribe to make sure that they're comfortable. But to get in and out of this car, it needs to have these features to be safe as a transport option. But that's it. That's my limited knowledge, because it's all focused around getting out and about in a car. So it's really important for people listening to this to understand that, because it's to get the best outcome, you need maybe an array of OTs to help you get, so a home mod one to be able to get you in and out of your home. I don't do that. A seating specialist for a wheelchair, don't do that. You might need a mental health one to help you get out and help you live your life based around depression and anxiety associated secondary responses to your disability. Or then you might need a driving OT specific for that driving. I don't agree to a generalist OT doing all of that because they're gonna miss stuff, and that's the same across all industries.
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, that's actually one of the things I was going to ask, which you answered, which I'll just re-highlight there, was can you have more than one OT on your funding or your plan or working with you? And as you said, the best situation is probably to have an array that are specializing to look at what you're doing and potentially even get along with each other and can communicate and work with each other. And
I really hope support coordinators are listening to this episode, because that's really important. They try and find the closest, most available OT to meet all of their needs. And, I've got a feeling that's where holes are and where issues come with prescribing bits and pieces, because I have to do so much problem solving when it comes to car mods and driving techniques and so forth. And somebody that doesn't work in driving all the time, prescribing something, so it's I don't know if you're going to ask this question or not, Ali, but while I'm on it, I'm going to talk about it. A generalist OT can prescribe anything to get in and out of a car.
Yeah.
So they can actually prescribe a wheelchair accessible van. So lowered floor, access into the car, wheelchair docking stations, tie down, seat belts, all of that type of stuff. According to the policies with NDIS, a generalist OT can prescribe all of that.
As an engineer, that makes me very, very nervous, because I just in the last 48 hours, I've spent a lot of time working on the compliance of this stuff, and just for one car and one modification. And it's very bloody complicated. There's a lot in there. So you really have to know a lot to be compliant, for all of that. Just a van, just a wheelchair access vehicle I've been working on, and it's pages and pages of just compliance requirements. So it's on there. So I'm
really passionate, and I might get shot down in regards to this, but I'm really passionate about recognizing special areas. We're not allowed to call ourselves experts because of APRA or specialists or things like that, but it really is an advanced scope of practice, and that has been recognized by APRA, which means that we've got advanced knowledge in this area. And that means that we're trained around these areas. We've got special interest groups. We've got task force. We've got, it is a special interest area. And it requires a lot of extra knowledge, because we're dealing with cars, road law, specialty,
fast speeds,
life and death situations, policies and procedures for regulations for you've spoken about it from an engineering point of view, and then the function of the person as well.
Yeah, so that's a good way to segue to the next thing. Do you have maybe 2, 3, or as many tips to find what you would call, well, actually, I'll premise it, because we have spoken about this in our podcast about finding a quote unquote good OT. And a little premise or story I'll say is, in my old life, I used to actually be a DJ in nightclubs, and people would always come and say, play good music. And what I would say to them is, look, that's kind of subjective, to an extent.
Yep.
And I think the same thing would be with OTs. You have to find someone that you get along with in general. But is there any other tips that you could give for people when they're looking for one?
Ask questions. We get asked questions, and what's my experience in this area or that area, or ask for the qualification. Just see if they've got the driver trained qualification up on the wall, or somewhere accessible, or ask them about it. We sign off all of our reports with our driver trained number as an example of our qualification number. So people understand that, yep, we're definitely driver trained, and we're not coming from a generalist background. Ask questions. We do a lot of social stuff, so people understand that we've got a lot of knowledge in this area. It's stuff that we do every day. Okay, so yes, it's a way of advertising to a point, but it's also building trust that we know this stuff through years and years of experience. Look, sometimes we might learn as we go. I think back of some of the first prescriptions that I did way back when, and go, oh geez, I wish I hadn't have prescribed that. But that was based on the knowledge that I had at that time. And I prescribed some hand controls which I thought were the best for that client at that time with the information that I had. And I put my hand up now that I've got a lot more information now than what I ever had way back at the start. And that would be the same for anybody. So understanding somebody's experience in the industry, or what supports they have in place to help them get the best possible answer for you. Because you might be dealing with, in a country area, somebody that comes in, it's okay to ask, how do you know that this is the best for me? And they might say that, oh, I'll go off and ask my mentor, or I'll go off and and that's a good sign.
What about if and I don't know, this is something which I found I ask, and I just wonder how much you're allowed to share, is, let's say if I'm a person that's been told I need this kind of access and XYZ product or something like solution, asking the OT, maybe not for hard evidence, but basically some kind of proof that they've actually done that before, something like that, and they've gotten it through, so we can kind of get, hey, this is a similar case to ours. Like, how much can they talk about that?
Look, I mean, we asked this question of you, and you answered it last week as well in regards to the modification side of it, or if your modifier hasn't installed it into that vehicle before, then they really should be assessing the vehicle, measuring it up and making sure. We are learning about new things coming onto the market all the time. I mean, a new hand control that's coming onto the market right now is the Vigel. Now, it's been around in the US for ages, but the Vigel hand control is coming into Australia, and it's a new hand control, and we're adapting to that, trying to increase our knowledge for that. And at some time, we're going to have, we have prescribed our first one of those. And we prescribe it based on the research that we do about the product, the way that it works, the way that what benefits it has to that client, and then how is it actually used, and then consulting with the modifier to make sure it's going to fit within vehicles. So we go through a whole assessment process. I can't remember what your question was. I've gone off on a tangent. What was the question?
Well, basically asking if they've done it before. So
if they've done it before. Sometimes you haven't done it before, and you come across conditions. Everyone's unique. Everyone's disability is unique. You can have a stroke, I can have a stroke, but they are completely different. Depending on which part of the brain, it can be in the same part of the brain and it still presents slightly differently. So you've got to assess everybody on their merits and how the disability impacts on them. A spinal cord injury may be at a certain level, and that's going to say it's going to affect this hand in a certain way. Like you might have wrist, but no finger function, as an example. And then you see somebody with the same level of injury, but they're slightly maybe not severed all the way through, and they've got some grip in their hand, and that makes all the difference. And that modification is completely different, and probably saves the NDIS $20,000 maybe.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So that's a good little time to start moving on to the next kind of phase of what I wanted to talk about, which is around kind of prescribing. So we've talked a little bit about, what it takes to be an OT, how to find one. And now that you're with your OT or set of OTs, what in the prescribing process and assessment process, is there a defined time this stuff can take? What do you need from the client? What kind of information? What are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we get that regularly, especially from when we're providing service agreements to support coordinators or participants or things like that. How long is this going to take? And I wish it was simple. And sometimes we have to ask for more hours in the budget and so forth, because everyone's unique, especially when they don't have a car, or they've got a car that doesn't meet the NDIS requirements, or the modification can't go into it. And then you have to work through the whole process of making sure that the car is the right fit for the modifications and the client. So how long does it take? It takes a bloody long time. You might see your OT for 3 hours at the start, and yet they're billing for 10, 15, 20 hours worth of work. So much work goes on behind the scenes. And I'm glad you asked this question, because this is really important. We do consulting with the modifiers. We do consulting with the support coordinators, the car dealers, the suppliers of the modification. So going, not just with the modifiers, but the suppliers as well, doing research to make sure that the product's the right fit for them. But then also we're having to write applications for funding. And it's like grant writing, applying for grants. You've got to write 10, 12, 15, 18, 20 pages, depending on how complex it is, on why this is the right products for the client to go into this car. And you've done your due diligence and made sure that this thing is the right thing. So NDIS can give you the tick of approval to go ahead with it all.
Sounds like you might face a similar kind of situation to engineers, as in you might get a bit of pressure going, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And what why is it taking so long?
Yeah.
And, et cetera, because that's a similar thing. Like I did an inspection on a lowered vehicle, and there's about 3 full days of work, paperwork just on the back end of it,
And if you're thinking about becoming a driver trained OT, you've got to understand you're going to do a lot of report writing. Yeah. 1 for licensing, and then 2 for the modifications, and then the follow-up and so forth as well. Yeah, there's a lot of sitting behind a computer, but geez, the reward, look at, I don't know if you're on YouTube, but have a look at the guy's face behind me. He didn't even have modifications. That's Bruno. We've interviewed Bruno in the past, and I caught up with him just the other week, and that smile on his face in the background there, the rewards of this are so fantastic, especially in the NDIS world, because you're working towards achieving something, where in the hospital side of it all, sometimes with the dementia assessments, it's a lot more, is this person safe and is it the right fit for you now? Okay. Yeah. So they're deteriorating, and is it the right fit for you still? Yeah.
Now that's good. So on that, from what you were saying, and this is sort of what I've experienced, and going back to what I first started with, the OT kind of being accelerated to celebrity status, seems like effectively the OT is the central person to this whole thing, to this whole NDIS thing. Like, it's all coming and going through that OT filter, from the modifier to the engineer to the products, suppliers, physios, or whoever else is dealing with them.
Yeah.
And as you said, writing the report.
It's a good point. Yeah. It's a good point, and you're kind of right. I don't see us as celebrities, but more of the hub of the wheel, of the spokes, to bring it all together. The communication between what the client wants and needs, and so forth, from a functional point of view, working with the modifier and working with NDIS. Yes, the modifier then works with the engineer, but we need to know that as well. We're also sometimes the person that needs to understand, well, we do need to understand them, but sometimes we're educating modifiers even on the policies around Australian road rules and designs and so forth as well. The NDIS has put us as the hub of the spokes of the wheel, to bring it all together. And if I'm happy to live with that. We are kind of the facilitator for a lot of this. Yeah.
So that's kind of why I was saying, is it a bit harder to be an OT these days, because you have a bit more pressure, from NDIS and so on, to get it right. So
especially when they ring you back and say, a little bit of a dig at NDIS, but we need more information about this, and we need more information about that. Sometimes we've written it in our reports, and they've just got to read a little bit deeper, or it's clearly outlined on page 10 or whatever. But there's getting your intelligence, experience, skills, knowledge questioned by NDIS can be hard to take sometimes. But look, they're doing their due diligence as well in regards to making sure that they're spending the government money the appropriate way.
All right, now to move on to a little bit more of a potentially touchy subject.
Okay.
It seems like, and I think that it could be a case of people also flagging negative news, and at the age of NDIS, but it seems like there is an increasing number of misprescriptions, or products not being prescribed correctly, and then people have lost all their money, and they're kind of like worse off than when they first started. And it's easy for people to get very personal and say, no, this person had it in for me, or they're scamming this, or this was something dodgy. I guess, what's your opinions on that? How do you mitigate that? How do you not fall into that trap?
I think it comes down to the experience of the OT, like we've already discussed, generalist versus, advanced scope of practice OT. A lot of the time, we've had clients come to us with, chariot trailers as an example, where it just didn't meet their needs. It was the wrong prescription, and it's sitting in their shed, not doing anything, and they needed a better solution. Yes, there's a product out there, quick prescription, fantastic, doesn't mean it's going to work. It's about understanding the whole big thing. Nothing wrong with chariot trailers. They're fantastic for the right person and the right need. But this person, it wasn't the right need. I think it comes, wrong prescriptions comes down to doing a full assessment and really getting down to the nitty gritties of why, what are their needs? What are their functional needs? What is the car that it's going into? And like we said, understanding all of those elements so you can make a right prescription in the first place. I have to admit that probably sometimes my prescriptions haven't been 100% because we're dealing with so much, but it's the closest we can possibly get at that time, based on cars and person and so forth, and knowledge at the time. I'm talking, about my experience years back, like I've already mentioned. But I would put my hand up to say that, you know, we do a good product based on our products prescription, based on the years of experience that we've got in this area.
Yeah, okay, that's big good tip. So, but on that note, what happens if you're, I mean, on either party, I don't know if it's different, OT or you know, end user or client. Let's say you're 6 months down the track, and like you said, this chariot trailer was the wrong thing, and being involved in them, I know they're not cheap. They're in the, you know, upwards of 10 grand. And that's a big chunk out of your budget.
Yep.
Is there compliance requirements for OTs? Is there comeback for the people? Can they get something back? Like what can people do if they're fallen in that trap, or even if the OT's done that and they've realized it?
Yeah. I don't know is the real short answer, and it will evolve as the NDIS is still evolving. Yeah, that's going to come up more and more. When you're talking about multiple thousands of dollars worth of modifications going into a car, then the NDIS really only want to prescribe and issue the funding for that modification once in 8 years. That's how it's based. So, you know, when you look at the NDIS policies online, they say that the car needs to be less than 5 years and traveled less than 80,000 kilometers. Okay. And that's set up so when they do the funding for such a car, that it needs to, that prescription of multiple thousands of dollars of funding is only really going to be issued once for the next up to 10 years. That's what they're looking at. They don't want to be prescribing tens of thousands of dollars every 2 years, as an example. So that means that you need to pick a car that's going to last for 5 years. And we explain that to our clients. So they really need to be considering this car. And if they can't afford a car, and we're going to have an interview with a client coming up who's had funding issued for a car that's done over 300,000 kilometers because it's her pride and passion. And we're going to talk to her about how that process went about and how we work through that. But there's extreme risk involved in that from an NDIS point of view, that this is going to be funded, and then next year the car's not going to be running and it's going to have to go into a new car. And you know, we needed to work through a whole lot of stuff to get that funding across the line. It gets a little bit tricky, like clients with MS, as an example, is a little bit harder because they've got a deteriorating condition more often than not. It's not that stable. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into prescribing for MS to say that if we prescribe this, it's going to, meet their needs for the next 10 years. And how do you prove that when it's a deteriorating condition of unknown quantities? But then if we do prescribe this, it can be altered for the next phase of their driving, you know, so we can add to it or do this or do that to help with the next bit. And that certainly makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think, I mean, on that space of misprescriptions and so on, also with being in the industry, just seeing it all increase, I have a feeling, as you said, the government, they don't like the idea of wasting their money. So
no, who does?
They are definitely tightening things up. And so, yeah, you just want to be careful around that point.
Yeah. I mean, if you buy a pair of shoes, you can buy it online. And if it's $100, yeah, it's $100. Yeah. If they don't fit or they're uncomfortable and you know, it's $100 or a dress or a shirt or if it doesn't fit. But if you're buying a $1,000 suit or more, you know, multiple $1,000 suit, you want to make sure that it fits and it's comfy and it's, you know, the tailored or whatever to your needs. You don't buy that online. You want to make sure it's the right fit if we're spending lots and lots of money, whether it's yours or the government's money.
Now, this is another one which, again, could be a bit touchy, but seems to be, as the industry grows, and you've got private companies doing OTs and so on, one of the potential issues that you have with the OT being so central as the hub is if things start going pear-shaped, in your mind as the client, you could be completely stuffed, because you go, well, I'm stuck with this person that I don't like, or we're not getting along and everything's falling apart. And what can people do? And actually the same with an OT. Like if they've realized, wait a minute, I'm way out of my depth here, or, this is just, we're not getting along. Is there options for divorcing on either end? And how do we go about that?
100% there is. Yeah, that's a very simple answer. If you want a second opinion about anything, go and seek a second opinion. Yeah, whether it's your GP, whether it's your doctor, whether it's your modifier, whether it's this, that, or anything else. If you're not 100% comfortable with what they're recommending, ask questions of why they're recommending that, so you understand. But if you can divorce your OT, 100%. I mean, it might be a little bit more difficult in a rural scenario when there's only one in that area, or one or two in that area. There might not be as many to move around, and NDIS is set up to use your local OT because the travel elements are not great. So if you're in a rural setting and you've got a driver trained OT in your rural setting, NDIS don't like funding for a private OT to travel from a city center to come to you when there is one available in your area. So you need to be able to negotiate with your planners and support coordinators and so forth to be able to help move through that, to make sure that the funding's appropriate. But do it before something's prescribed. Do it before the big money has been spent on a big product, because going back is sometimes difficult, and you need to prove with a new assessment why it's functionally not appropriate. And there is that loophole available in there. So if someone has prescribed the wrong thing, and it's not a loophole, but there is that available for the client, for the participant, to be able to be re-prescribed if it's the wrong fit or so forth, or if your function has changed.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a really good tip, that one. Do it before you prescribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, ask questions. Ask lots of questions and test it out. We say it at the end of every single podcast. Set yourself up with a trial. Set yourself up with a trial. Please set yourself up with a trial and make sure that you've driven with it for not 5 minutes, but a good chunk of time wherever possible before you've asking for NDIS to fund it, or yourself, or work cover, or whoever else it is.
All right, sounds good. So I think that's sort of wrapping up. As I said, I kind of thought about it before we spoke, and thought kind of try and travel through the journey of what an OT is, and working with NDIS and finding one, and what the process is, and if things go wrong, being able to get rid of them as well. So I think we covered everything there.
We've certainly gone over time, so I hope people have found that interesting. We didn't even get to talk about specialized driving instruction.
No, we didn't.
And the driving instructor stuff. So
well, maybe we actually come back as and interview you more as a driving instructor. I think that might be a good idea, and the reason why is and before we spoke with Brad, before we spoke on this interview, I did mention to Brad that I'm happy to have this go longer, because I really do think this particular episode will be very, very beneficial to everybody in this industry. As we've just identified now, the OT really is that central hub. So everything comes and goes through the OT. So it's good to kind of dig a little bit deeper so people can understand a bit more about what's involved, a bit more of the context from either side. Thank you very much for your time, Brad. If anyone has any questions, please get in contact with us. We'd love to answer any more questions around the OT process. I'm sure this might spark a bit of interest, so please fire away. I'm happy to answer anything from that. And
just go over to the Facebook page, people. Go over to the Facebook page. Put your questions and comments in there. You can do it on Instagram as well, or you can put it on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from. put comments down below, or you can email them through to us, driveablepodcast@gmail.com. Email them through to me. I'm more than happy to answer questions in regards to the OT role within driving. 100% happy to take that. Make sure that you press the like button while you're there and share it with people.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, guys, stick around. We're going to take a break, and Brad and I will come back with the top 3 takeaways from this episode and offer a bit of analysis around that as well. All right, welcome back. In this section, we bring you our expert analysis and top 3 takeaways from the interview. This is where Brad and I provide our more than 30 years of joint experience in the industry, helping people with disabilities to drive and get out in the community in a safe and meaningful way. So I will kick it off with one of the top takeaways, which was a really good point. You can have multiple OTs work on your NDIS funding / package. And we highly encourage it because, as we said, in general, just like I just mentioned this to Brad just before we started, there is a very old school human being saying you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Mm-hmm. And it's best to have masters working on your file rather than jack of all trades, I'd say.
Yeah. And we touched on that. Driving really is an advanced scope of practice. It's recognized as an advanced scope of practice. And yeah, there's so many bits and pieces involved in prescribing for vehicle modifications, but also, look, we didn't even touch on it, but the other areas as well that don't involve modifications, whether it's autism or intellectual disability or a vision issue or a brain injury from somebody whacking their frontal lobe on the steering wheel in an accident. There's so many areas that just as a driver trained OT, we have to have knowledge about. And, and my brain, like I said in the interview, my brain is already full. And when something goes in, something has to drop out the other side. And if I was a generalist OT trying to prescribe vehicle mods, I'd be questioning myself on whether I'd be doing the right thing or not for that client. And if it's out of my area, look, as it is with seating, where like it is when it is pediatrics or we seek help from psychiatrists and psychologists, when it comes to mental health, seeking help is really important from somebody that's got more knowledge than me.
Yeah. One thing I'll mention as an engineer, I guess this is something, and a modifier, but more from the engineering side of things. Again, this is where I want to highlight that sometimes what happens is OTs that are really good at seating look at a car seat and go, well, I can prescribe this. It's a car seat, I can prescribe seating in a car. And whilst seating concepts might be the same, a car is a moving thing that's moving at 60 k's an hour. And as an engineer, there is huge amounts of, it's a massive dynamic environment. And I guess just being a seating OT, I don't think would be enough. You'd really need to team up with someone who understands that automotive environment or get some kind of education around that. So that's kind of what we mean is just being generalist and going, yeah, I could probably do that because I've done seats before. Yeah. Cars are very dynamic environments, and you're moving in all different angles and speeds, and you really just have to understand that whole environment. You can't get out of your depth. So
yeah, I'll just do a little shout out to Steve Wilson seating here in Adelaide. Boy, I've learned so much from him in regards to seating, in regards to wheelchair postures and so forth like that. Stuff that I didn't know, and still heaps of stuff that I don't know. And we, have teamed up with him. So get yourself a team for sure of OTs. Even as a driver trained OT, I've got a team of other OTs that are outside of our business to make sure that we're getting the best outcome for our client when they need to, when it's not in my knowledge bank, we go and look for other people that can help them for sure.
Yeah. And that's actually a great segue to, I guess this is similar to a similar point to what we mentioned last week with the engineering modifiers, is is sort of what makes that good OT, or how do you know you're in the right hands? And
so this is point number 2. Yeah.
Point number 2.
Yep.
Yeah, finding that right OT, or are these people doing the right thing, or am I in the right hands? Because as we said, they are central, and you do want to flag if things aren't going right. Like you said, you are able to divorce your OT if it's not going well. And so some, like you just mentioned before, I think is a very good point of what would make a good OT / what means that you're in safe hands. Someone saying, look, I'm not really that good at seating here, but we can go get a seating guy and he can come and do some measurements and so on and so forth. So like we were saying with the modification, what you want to see is them sort of processing things in that way, going, oh, I want to talk to this expert, asking questions, taking measurements, taking you, for example, like we're a modification company, and we often have OTs come there with their client and multiple times and go, okay, maybe this might work. Let's measure this up and get some other expert here, or get your family member here. I think those kind of things are flags that you're in the right hands.
Yeah, and if they're not happening, if someone's just prescribing something really quickly because it's an easy fit from the OT's point of view, or even the modifier's point of view, but and it's across all industries, mind you. It's not just OTs and driving. If someone's just out to then maybe they're not out to make a quick buck, but to do it as quickly as possible, then that should be a red flag to everybody. Yeah, OTs, years of experience might make me go head towards a specific product. However, we still make sure that we are exploring or providing all the options to the client, so they are making an informed decision alongside of us. We might have our inkling that this is the better product for them, but we need to make sure that they're on board with that and they understand how we got to that point along the way, and see if they agree with us, and test it, and still trialing it, even though I've tested it and trialed it with other clients a million times. Because like we said in the podcast, every single person is an individual, and their disabilities are individual.
Yeah, and one of the other flags which I've seen just through the industry is, if you find, as we said, this scheme is about what's the right fit for the person in terms of the product. So if you're finding the people you're dealing with are really heavily focused on things like how much these things cost, and we need to get the funding over the line, and et cetera, and not expensive or too expensive, or we could spend more money here or whatever, that's kind of not the right conversations. They're flags. They're kind of like, why are we talking about that? We just need to be talking about, what do I need and how do I measure me up or get me ready? And then that's the second part of the conversation, perhaps. But if they're thinking get it over the line and funding and all that, those are those flags which I've seen myself. Okay,
I just want to touch base on this as well, though. There's some people out there prescribing the most expensive stuff just because funding is available. So it goes the other way as well. Let's just prescribe you the cheapest thing because we can get it over the line and it'll be approved real quickly. I know that there's some companies out there with KPIs, key performance indicators, on how many things they got prescribed this month.
Yeah.
And so when you've got that as a KPI, that's going to be a big, you don't know that on face value, but when that's a KPI, you've got people prescribing things that they know is going to get ticked off rather than meeting the person's needs. And that's a huge red flag if you ever see that. And that needs to be further investigated.
Yeah. So it's on that. And as we said, and one huge tip on that point, just before we move to the next one, was I really loved what Brad said. If you do have a problem, if you are needing to potentially look at second opinions, divorcing your OT or whatever, do it before the prescription and the funding goes through, because otherwise, as we've seen multiple times ourselves, it's too late and government doors can close for 5 to 10 years and you're back to where you started from the next 5 to 10 years.
Key point there. NDIS are looking to approve a modification to fit within a car for 5 to 8 years and hopefully longer. Okay, so that's really important. Depending on how expensive it is, the more expensive it is, the more important that is. Okay, so if it's a left foot accelerator for $1,000 or $2,000 or something like that, that's going to be easier to upgrade to a new car later on down the track, like 2 or 3 years, because we're talking much less money. But when it comes to tens of thousands of dollars, this needs to be the right prescription for multiple years, and the lifespan of that car, which is 5+ years, 8 years is what they average it around.
And as you can see, we talk a lot and we have a lot of information to give, and that
way
is
over time.
But that's all good. And I guess that's kind of the reason why I'm mentioning that is segue onto learning number 3. A lot goes on. A lot is going on behind the scenes. You may only interact with your OT or even myself, an engineer, for an hour. Engineers, to be honest, sometimes it's half an hour. Just take a few photos and have a look and make sure it all looks good. But then 90% of it is all just paperwork in the background. You know, as Brad said, they're writing 15, 20-page reports, sending into the government. Just sit down and write 20 pages of gibberish. It's going to take you a few hours, you know? So if you have to actually put something together and consider all your options and all of that kind of stuff, there's hours of work there. And so looking at that face value, I guess this is a little bit of a call out there is give us a bit more love for all the work that we do behind the scenes, because there is a lot going on behind the scenes, and it does sometimes feel pretty tough when people kind of question that and go, why are you doing it? And this isn't worth it, and so on and so forth. And we're working really hard behind the scenes.
Okay, everybody, next time you see Ali, make sure you put your face mask on for COVID reasons, but then give him a hug. Yeah,
big hug for all my hard work.
He needs a hug. But you know what? We all do. This can be a challenging industry to work in because there are so many elements to bring together. We spoke about the OT being the hub, but we rely on a lot of information from a lot of different resources, and we've got to try and bring all that together. So there is so much that goes on behind the scenes that the client participant support coordinator, LAC, may not be aware of. And we do need a lot of time to do that, and we are investing many hours in trying to prescribe the right thing. Sometimes it might be really quite simple and it's done within 5 to 6 hours, 3 hours with the client, and a couple of hours of one report. But when you're prescribing modifications, especially big modifications like a wheelchair accessible van into the driving position and driving with hand controls, and you're looking at lowering a floor into a van for $100,000, and then you're looking at hand controls for maybe another $100,000, and you've got a $250,000 car on the road, that takes a lot of prescription, and it takes a lot of proof and evidence that this is good value for money. So you need to go into detail. So NDIS will go, yep, I can see that you've ticked this box and that box, and you've dug deep there, and you know that it's the right modification for this person. You've consulted with the modifiers, you've consulted with the ADRs, the Australian road design rules, you've consulted with the engineers, you've consulted with the client, you've consulted with this, that, and everybody else. And I can see that all here in this report. And that's where the time goes.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to wrap it up. And as you said, the time's been going. So let's wrap it up. And as we wind up this episode, we want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Mobility Engineering and Williams OT, for funding and helping us bring the show to you today, the interview with Brad today. Williams OT, driver, AXN rehab is all pieces of the puzzle to assist people with disabilities reach their driving and community mobility goals. And Mobility Engineering is a team of passionate and dedicated people focused on bringing Australia's largest range of suitable transport solutions for all walks of life. And we're always looking for more sponsorship and more support. This is not an easy show to run. It takes a fair bit of time and money to run it. So if you would love to be a sponsor of the show, please hit us up. And also, if you know anyone that would like to be interviewed or should be interviewed, or if you want to be interviewed, please contact us, driverbullpodcast@gmail.com, or look us up on the socials. And get in contact. We're monitoring all the contact channels. And finally, as we say in every episode, the advice provided in this podcast in general is general in nature. So if you have any queries about what you can do and what will work for you, get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer and set yourself up with a trial. Trials really do put you into that driver's seat. Thanks very much, Brad.
Yeah, thank you very much, mate. Thanks for all your deep questions, and I hope that this has helped people. So see you out on the road.
See you there.
Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Aliak Varian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.